I'm with Dr. Adam Fisher. He's a clinical professor at Brigham Young University, and he works with individuals and couples and does group therapy. He also teaches courses on relationships at BYU and Northwestern University. And then you also have a private practice where you work with individuals with out of control sexual behavior. And you also have a background being board certified in couple and family psychology, which is pretty unique as a psychologist.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to learn more from Adam as an expert in this area. So Adam, why don't you share with us a bit about your background and kind of how you began working with sexual concerns, and then maybe a little bit specifically about pornography.
Yeah. So like, long story short, real briefly, I was going to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to do. And like sort of last minute, I applied to a counseling program because I had heard this tape by John Gottman, you know, the Marital research. And I was like, wow, that's like really interesting, talking about like couple dynamics and like breaking down a fight and these things. So I got really interested in relationships. And that's what sort of steered me into counseling and psychology and these kinds of things. My Ph.D. was at Indiana University, where they have the Kinsey Institute, which is a sex research sort of mecca kind of place. And interestingly, so I sort of grew up in Utah, kind of in a more conservative kind of community with kind of more like, my parents were like the proud Democrats of like our little town. But I learned that like at the Kinsey Institute, you know, in those kinds of settings, I felt kind of conservative. And I'm talking about like some of my clients who have concerns about pornography or things like this. And some of my colleagues are like, huh?
Yeah.
Why would you be concerned about that? So I've been in a lot of different sort of settings. And initially I sort of felt like, well, maybe this is just kind of a religious person's problem. And there's that sort of bias out there that I've come across. But working in Chicago and in Utah, I've seen, and in Indiana, I've seen some clients that even who aren't religious, but just feel some maybe ethical or moral conflict, or they just feel out of control to some degree around their sexual behavior. Some have been through kinds of like addiction kinds of treatment programs, some haven't, but there's this common thread of, I feel sort of not totally in control of what I'm doing, whether I feel like I'm an addict or not. I'm not really at peace with my behavior.
I think that I've seen that as well. Like there's a lot of different names or reasons why somebody struggles, but it really does come down to that. And you bring up that idea, like it's so relative what we go through and what's conservative or liberal, and it changes so much as you work with different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, it really does.
So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. To what extent do you feel like people's religious upbringing may contribute to a struggle with pornography? Because you also mentioned for some people that's not a factor at all. For those that are religious, to what extent do you feel like that is a contributing factor?
Yeah, and there's some research on this now that says, yeah, if you're very religious, like Christian and conservative and very orthodox in your beliefs, that you're going to have more psychological pain or distress or spiritual distress around your viewing. And that's sort of what the research is suggesting. On a sort of, you know, non-research based sort of anecdotal sort of my experience with clients is that's true for the most part, although as I've said, I've had clients that were atheists or, you know, not strongly religious, or they didn't have any religious or moral beliefs for or against sexual imagery, but they still felt like this is impacting my relationship in some way. Or like, gosh, I have sex with my wife once a month, but I masturbate to sexual imagery, you know, 30 times a month. And I feel like that's not working out so well for me. I need to figure out what's going on.
I appreciate that perspective, because I think some people view it as this is just a religious dissonance concern. And for a lot of people I work with, that's a big part of it, but that's not the whole situation.
Right. It is a big part of it. And I think that overshadows the people who aren't necessarily religious and are still concerned. But yeah, I would say that moral incongruence, like I believe this is wrong, so therefore I'm distressed about it. I've never been able to talk about sexuality growing up, and so I keep these things that I find pleasurable a secret. Like that's definitely a huge part of it. But I'd say 5 to 10% of my clients that I've had aren't religious at all.
So you've been in a couple different worlds here, from pretty conservative Utah to Chicago to Indiana with King's Institute. How was it to go from a place where it's like, yeah, we don't really talk about sexuality or anything that might be deviant in that realm, to a place where it's like, why is pornography a concern? Like, I don't understand that. Like, how was
Yeah.
it to go from those extremes?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, as I said, like I always felt like very liberal growing up. And then I go off to grad school. Well, so first I was at Gonzaga, and it was sort of similar to Utah in some ways, like Eastern Washington. And then out at Indiana, which is a conservative state, but Indiana University and the Kinsey Institute being more kind of progressive and social justice kind of oriented and whatever. Um, some of those values I hold too, but I felt like the conservative guy in the room, which
Yeah.
was really weird for me growing up as like, one of the few liberals in my whole town as a kid,
Yeah.
we sort of adopt our parents' views when we're little. Um, and then now being back in Utah, um, sort of the same kind of switch again. Although, like, I think I associate with a lot of therapists, and the field of therapy itself is sort of a more social justice kind of oriented field anyway,
Yeah.
in a sense.
For
Uh,
sure.
but when it comes to like working with a client, I mean, that's not really on my mind in terms of like my political views or the clients. It's more like, what's the problem? If there's religion involved, what are the strengths of your beliefs? Where might you be getting stuck? Like, I'm not going to try to change their beliefs or say you should be for or against this thing or that thing, or you really should lighten up about pornography and you'd be happier. Like, no, like that's not my place to say either way what they should be doing with that. You should take this more seriously. You know, what are your values and where do you want to go?
And I found that to be a really helpful approach, not to kind of assume what is going to be healthy or not for another person, but really get into their worldview. And if a behavior is distressing for them, it's worthy of attention,
Yeah,
and to work on.
yeah. Like, so let's at least kind of explore that. One of the first questions that I like to ask, that I didn't come up with this question, but it's, what is your vision for sexual health?
Mm,
And a lot of people have never thought about, and I hadn't thought about that kind of question until I came across it, honestly, like in grad school. Like, where do you want to go? First of all, what is sexual health to you? What do you want it to look like in the future? Where do you want to go? Versus just, what do I not want in my life? And so what often at times happens, as you know, like, client comes into your office and says, I want to stop looking at pornography. Well, part of them wants to stop, right? The part that's talking to you in the room really wants to stop, and the part that talks to their friends or their family or their religious leaders or their spouses, that part wants to stop. But there's this other part that's not talking there in the room that wants to keep going.
mm,
And at least this is one way of looking at it. And sometimes it's helpful to sort of bring that part to the table too.
yeah.
Like, there's actually some ambivalence here for some people. Some people are like, nope, I'm ready to stop. I'm committed. And other people feel pretty ambivalent actually, and they've not been able to explore that safely. Because how do you say in a culture or in a relationship where this is wrong, and everyone around you is saying the same thing? How do you admit to yourself or to anyone else, yeah, I'm kind of ambivalent about changing?
Yeah.
That's where therapy and group therapy and things like that are really, really helpful, because it's a place where you can actually admit to yourself and be honest. Like, yeah, I do want to change, and part of me kind of doesn't because I like this.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up because that's so human. Like, I
Hmm.
think about all my behaviors and health behaviors.
It's
There's always ambivalence.
totally,
It's like, yeah, I want to eat better. I want to exercise more.
yeah,
But part of me wants to eat treats and just kind of sit around. Like, that's just human. And you're
totally.
right. It feels unsafe to admit that, yeah, part of me might enjoy this activity, viewing sexual images, even though there's a lot of negative consequences and I don't really want to, and it's against my beliefs. But there's often a reason why we're engaging in that. And I found that we often have a lot of reluctance to admit that because it feels very shameful, but it's
Yeah,
also very human.
yeah. I love, not in sort of like a I want to put people through pain sort of way, but I love asking clients like, what do you like most about this?
You can't ask that.
You know, they're like, well, you know, I mean, a natural reaction, not mocking that response. It's a very natural reaction when you feel ashamed about something that part of you kind of likes or really likes, but you've kind of kept hidden. You
Yeah.
know, it's that needs to sort of be expressed.
Yeah.
What did you like most? What turned you on most about what you were watching? And they
Wow.
feel like, some clients feel like, oh, I can't say that. I can't talk about that. The problem with not talking about it is then it sort of keeps that hidden in a way, and more secrecy and more shame. And the like the addiction camp, which I don't know a lot about, but they talk about like the addiction or the anonymity and the accessibility and those kinds of things.
Yep.
It's secret, it's shameful. Anytime you add secrecy and shame to something erotic, I've seen anyway, you have sort of a recipe for a problem.
Yep.
And so not talking about it, I can't talk about this, it's going to make it more and more of this sort of alluring thing to hold on to, versus like non-judgmental sort of space. Let's talk about the pros and cons. Let's talk about the things that I like and how, wow, I'd have to give up this pleasure in order to change.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much I want to do that. And admitting that to themselves is a big step.
It's huge. And I think that's maybe one of the things I value most about the therapy space is creating that safety to really look at a problem more objectively and more balanced. But when we come to things like sexuality and religion and morality, it almost feels like we can't take an objective view. You have to have a really strong stance. And sometimes that gets people stuck.
Right.
When we can actually look at both sides, that does free up some capacity to reflect and make change. But there's a part of it's like that really resists that. It's like, that feels wrong to do that. And yet that's probably the path forward.
Totally. And especially if I'm talking with someone who has similar religious or moral values as I do, even more so in my mind, there's like the sense of, no, wait, we shouldn't. There's a thought in my head going, you can't talk about this.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm a therapist. I'm not the bishop. I'm not the religious leader. I'm not the spouse. Like, what's going to be workable for this person?
Yeah.
What is their vision, first of all? Where do they want to go? And I think you've probably talked about this in a lot of the ACT kinds of things, but like there's that gravestone metaphor, like what would you want on your gravestone?
Yeah.
Maybe you've heard of this one. Like I always ask clients, like, would you want written on your gravestone, he stopped masturbating?
Yay.
Or yeah, after 2023, he no longer looked at pornography ever again. Like, for someone who that's consistent with their beliefs, like that would be something that they would be excited about, but not that they would want their life to be about that.
Yeah.
Or like, let's say it's a special kind of cemetery where everyone's gravestones has their vision for sexual health on it. It's kind of a funny thing to think about, but let's say that's the case. Would you want never looked at porn again on your gravestone, or would you want something else, something positive? What do you want your sexuality to be about? So trying to move people in that direction, while also grappling with, I don't want it to be about not viewing porn, but I also don't want it to be about just sitting around viewing imagery all the time. So where are we going to go?
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because often when clients come in, it is, I want to stop looking pornography, or I don't want to be depressed anymore. I don't want to be anxious. And when I'll ask, like, okay, if you weren't depressed or anxious or looking at porn, what would your life be like? And often it's like, I don't know. Like, I've spent all my focus and energy trying to get rid of something. And that isn't the same as health. Like, the absence of a problem is not the same thing as health.
Right.
So how do you help clients develop a framework for what healthy sexuality might look like if it's more than just the absence of a pornography problem?
That's a challenging thing, because there aren't a lot of models or visions out there for what like a healthy sexual relationship, or I would say like individual like sexual health look like. Some people have a pretty strong vision of what like if they believe in like monogamous marriage, like a lot of religious people do, and myself, like they have an idea for what sexual health might look like as a couple in a marriage. But a lot of my clients aren't married, or these kinds of behaviors like online or et cetera, like are sort of outside of that, and they don't know how to sort of manage that kind of issue. So like what their individual sort of definition of sexual health is, they really don't know. Or what is sexual health anyway, is a big thing. There's a definition that I like. It says, sexual health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. So sexual health being more about who you are and what you value, and your sexual behavior being what you're doing. most people think those are sort of the same thing, and they haven't really thought about um, their well-being around sexuality, their knowledge, their comfort level talking about sexuality with others that that are appropriate for them and their culture or beliefs. Um, they've not given that a lot of thought, and can't blame them. Who's helped them have these kinds of conversations? So especially men. I've seen in conservative cultures, the sort of entrance ticket for a man to be able to talk about sex or have a sexual health conversation beyond just like joking or these kinds of things, he's got to be labeled as an addict and sent into some kind of treatment,
Wow.
or even worse, even much worse, he's got to have offended in some way, or spouse sent them in. Like, this is the cost, this is the way for a man to get a sexual health conversation opportunity for a lot of men. Women to some degree, but I found that more women that I talked to said, oh yeah, I had a few friends growing up and we could talk about like what's it going to be like on the wedding night, or sexual relationships or things like that. But with men, oh yeah, I could never talk to my guy friends. Like, we go golfing and we'll joke about sex, but we don't really talk about it.
Yeah.
And I know they're all struggling with pornography, but we don't really talk about it.
Wow. So it wasn't until you kind of like mess up that you actually
Yeah.
get permission to
Yeah.
talk about sexuality.
The guys that are having these kinds of conversations are the ones who have been in like Sex Addicts Anonymous, or like a group like mine, which is a little bit different, but those are the ones who are talking about it. And they're saying, hey, I want to talk to my guy friends about this. But otherwise, I rarely hear, unless a man was raised in a home where like, they had like the 1,000 1-minute conversations about sex with their parents growing up, and it was more of an open topic. Otherwise, there's nothing. There's some humor. They watch some funny movies together.
Yep.
They have sex-related jokes, and that's the extent of their sexual health conversations.
Wow.
And then pornography online and sexual imagery online, which everybody agrees, whether they're whatever they think about pornography and the ethics or the morals of it, it's a horrible educator.
Yeah.
The media, like movies in general, like you could just take like a TV show like Friends or whatever. This is not good sex education.
No.
But that's where they're getting it.
So it's your lucky day, Adam. You get to fix the world here. I'm going to give you the power. What are the principles that people need to know or be thoughtful about when they think about healthy sexuality?
Yeah. So there's 6 that I've come across, and this is from Doug Ron Harvey, who's an expert in out of control sexual behavior. First one that's really important, obviously, is consent. This would be involving more than one person. There's voluntary cooperation. There's a balance between one person's autonomy to give clear consent in combination with another person's right to engage in sexual behavior with people that they choose. So this has to be clear, obviously.
Can you think about how our world would be different if we truly understood consent and went through that process as we're dating or in relationships?
Oh my gosh, it would be so different. And I'm learning about consent all the time. It's not just like this simple, like, don't coerce people. Well, that it does involve that.
Yeah.
Right? But it goes so much beyond that. Like, I think just the other day, it was like, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago maybe, in a moment of like not even thinking, and some people are going to think this is stupid, and that's fine. In a moment of not thinking, like, I tickled my daughter. I forgot, because I hadn't done it in a long time, that she doesn't like to be tickled.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, Dad, don't tickle me. She laughed because it's ticklish, I said, don't tickle me. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And we moved on. And like I said, I won't do that unless you want me to, or else, I ask you first and you say, yeah, that's fine. Little things like that aren't like a violation of, sexual health, for example.
Yeah, you didn't traumatize her. She's not scarred.
It's
That's
fine.
a real example of we didn't get consent.
Right. And obviously, like, all of these things can be taken to the extreme, but I think this plays out all over the place. I mean, I should have learned because I knew when my wife and I were dating, she got tickled a lot growing up, actually. She was the youngest. And when we were dating, sometimes I would tickle her, and then she kind of gave me some feedback, like, hey, I've got tickled all the time. I don't like it. Oh, okay. And so, like, didn't get it through my head. And then I had a daughter, did the same thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. So just the reason why I bring that up is it's just a little example that's seemingly innocuous, but it's something. And then there's this whole spectrum of like ways to look at like how we sort of invade people's spaces that maybe we could be more thoughtful about.
Yeah.
So
I love
consent.
that.
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, that's the foundation, is just having that and being aware of like your values or your interests or desires in that moment may be very different than somebody else's. And you need to have a conversation. And so many times we just assume it or kind of focus on ourselves, but those need to be pretty intentional, ongoing conversations. And the world would be a different place if we even just implemented that first principle of consent.
I think it's the most foundational one of these six. It's the most important by far. I mean, not to take from the rest of them because they're also huge, as we'll talk about. But non-exploitation. So don't exploit people. It seems like pretty straightforward, but this comes out in sort of subtle ways sometimes. I have some clients, for example, that are concerned about the type of imagery they're viewing.
Yeah.
How do they know that this imagery did not exploit somebody?
Yeah.
You know, I've heard some people argue, well, if you're paying for it and it was done by some reputable company or something, you can trust more that these people were paid fairly and treated well or whatever. So there's some ethical things that clients have to think through. But otherwise, like most of my clients are not paying, first of all. Whether they should or not, that's a different debate than here. But they don't know where this imagery is coming from. They're just Googling, typically. Or they're looking on some like mainstream, like YouTube kind of sites that probably ripped their videos from somewhere else. You know, who knows if this imagery has taken advantage of or harmed a woman or a vulnerable population.
Yeah.
It's an important thing to think about that I think sometimes we don't talk about very much. So that's one issue, but to get there, you have to ask the clients, you know, what are you looking at? And I think some kinds of treatment programs don't ask that enough, or get really clear about what it is that you're into. It's just like, okay, this is pornography. It's bad.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean by pornography? One time, somebody said to me, "I'm struggling with pornography." I said, "Well, what are you watching?" And they said, "Well, I look at Victoria's Secret magazines."
Yeah.
You know, and I said, "I totally see how, in your perspective, this is defined as pornography, but you know, a lot of people would consider that to be, you know, it's sexual in nature. You know, it's alluring or it's erotic, but it wouldn't be considered pornography." And then the
It might be
client
an
said,
advertisement.
right. Then the client said, "Oh, well, I guess I've never looked at pornography then." I was like, "Oh," you know, so getting sort of more clear about the type of imagery and how some of it can be exploitative. And I mean, speaking of, you know, things like current issues today, like racism,
Yeah.
there is a lot of racist content out there that promotes very racist stereotypes. And this is totally my soapbox kind of issue. And other people may not agree, but I feel like just because you add sex to something does not all of a sudden make it okay. Okay, I know racism is bad, but if I add eroticism to it, then it's okay. And it's just something I've been kind of thinking about lately around the type of sexual behaviors and the type of imagery that people are viewing. And like, I'm not saying like this is what people should be doing or not, but just kind of bringing up this issue I think is important.
Yeah, being thoughtful about that. Like, you know, these are people's lives. We don't know their background and their ability to choose freely. And I think that's probably my biggest concern with pornography. Is like, there might be a lot of people exploited there, and I struggle with that concept. I understand why people are viewing. They're not A lot of people are not viewing for that intention, and
Yeah.
yet there might be people that were harmed
Yeah.
in these films. And it is, I think, helpful to think about that. Is this truly consensual? And are people freely choosing this? And a lot of people maybe aren't.
Yeah. So in terms of imagery, that's a sort of an non-exploitation kind of piece. But I think also in terms of behavior with other people, non-exploitation involves not leveraging your power control to receive gratification. I meet with people all the time that feel like, yeah, I wasn't raped, but this was not a good situation, and I felt pressured. And I said yes, but I regret it. And I really felt like if I had said no, then there would have been a long conversation, and he would have pressured me more and more and more. And so that the client themselves is not defining it as I didn't consent. They're saying I did, but I felt exploited. I felt controlled. Um, and some people who are doing this exploiting, like, they don't think of it that way, or they're not
Right.
realizing it. These are sort of people who think they're good guys or whatever. But it's important to consider.
It's a big deal,
Yeah.
especially in our world, because we hear those stories over and over of sexual trauma and these things where other people may not even be aware of it, but it has a huge impact on people's well-being.
I mean, I've even seen this in a number of marriages where both partners were sexually abstinent before marriage, and which is fine, and that fits with their values, great. Um, and then in some cases, it wasn't because of the abstinence, but in some cases, they had some interactions, some sexual interactions early on in the marriage where one felt exploited,
Mm.
or they felt pressured beyond just like, hey, can we please have sex sometime soon? Like, beyond that, to the point, like, if I don't consent to my husband, then he's going to be upset.
Yeah.
And so the relationship kind of takes this flavor of pressure and duty, and I've got to do this, which, kills desire.
Mm.
So some other things to think about, but those are kind of on a different tangent than sexual imagery, for example. And as well as like the next principle, which was protection from sexually transmitted infections or unintended pregnancy and these kinds of things. With the clients I work with who are mostly concerned around their imagery viewing, this is not typically a concern, but it's a sexual health principle.
Yeah.
The next one, though, is really big, which would be honesty.
Mm.
And this is one where I see a lot of clients sort of struggle with. Some of them, a minority, but some of them have OCD. And there's sort of this almost obsession around honesty.
Yep.
We're sitting in a religious service or church, for example, and I looked over and I'm married and I saw this other woman there. And so I better tell my wife that I find her attractive. And so I lean over to my wife and I say, yeah, she's beautiful, right? And we've had this history together, my wife and I, and I've already upset her for, whatever. And this is not helpful. Sharing every thought in your head with unlimited candidness and complete transparency with, all the thoughts in your head are not you, and that's not a helpful thing in terms of honesty. So it's not unlimited openness with every thought that goes through your head. At the same time, there's the other extreme of I keep a lot of secrets.
Mm.
And in some cases, even like I'm not honest with myself. Like we talked about earlier about what do you like about sexual imagery? Oh, I don't like any of it. Well, that's curious.
You spend a
Yet
lot of time viewing it.
yeah,
Mm.
you spend a lot of time viewing something that you hate. Well, part of you clearly does dislike it or hate it or think it's wrong. But honesty with yourself, honesty with your partner, whatever that agreement is. I've worked with a number of couples on this, really, where they have to figure out together, what is our agreement around disclosure?
Yep.
Does this work for us to disclose every time we have some attraction to someone else? Or should I tell you when I want to view sexual imagery and I'm feeling temptation for that or something?
Mm.
Or other couples would say, like, this is your problem. You're in therapy, you're in group therapy or whatever. You talk to the religious leader. If you need to check in with me every once in a while, that's fine. But otherwise, I don't want to know every thought that goes through your head. I don't want to function as your sponsor and have you report to me every time. Different therapists sort of approach that differently.
Yeah.
I'm kind of open, like with a couple, like what works for you two? Let's try it out for a month. And if that works, good, let's keep doing it. If not, like, let's try something else, because not everything works for the same person or for different people. I mean,
I appreciate that mindset. Is we're really going to make it individualized. What is that you need? But the biggest thing is we're going to have a conversation about what is really going on for yourself and with your partner. And when it comes to sexuality, we just aren't well versed in that, and it's uncomfortable. But really, for sexual health, we have to have honesty around it. We have to have the chat.
yeah. Imagine just for anyone, you're growing up in a culture where you rarely talk about sex other than like it's bad and dirty and wrong, so save it for your marriage.
Yep.
Which some people get. And you don't talk about it with your friends except maybe some jokes. here and there. You see it in movies, which you kind of run out of the room if your parents are also in the room at the same
Right.
time. And then you watch a lot of sexual imagery online. And now you get married and you're supposed to have a sexual health conversation with somebody. So when someone doesn't, I'm like, well, no kidding. Of course you couldn't.
Yep.
Or of course, like it was too scary. Like, I mean, you could have done it, but you know, I'm not expecting people to be able to just to do that. They need to have had some practice,
Yeah.
and being able to have, whether with a therapist or a group. I think group can be, whether it's some kind of group, it's just some practice being able to talk to each other. So I prefer groups where people can talk amongst each other, and have these kinds of conversations with other people. That's going to make the conversation with a partner go a lot better.
Absolutely. And it takes so much time to cultivate not only that insight, awareness, comfort,
Yeah.
knowledge, honesty, language. You can go on and on about the maybe the skills that you need to acquire to have this honest conversation around sexuality. And I think the challenge is like you mentioned, that people typically don't have this chat until they've kind of run into some problems.
Yeah.
And that makes it just so much more challenging because there's a lot more shame. It's not just like, yeah, let's talk about our healthy sexuality. It also comes with, yeah, I've done some things that I don't feel great about.
Yeah.
It's just really challenging. But honesty is so key. So I'm glad that's part of those 6 principles.
Totally. And yeah, again, it looks different for different couples. And like, what is our agreement? I always tell couples, like, you know, let's say one partner has this problematic viewing of sexual imagery, and they're both sort of invested in that person stopping. I would always encourage them, like, okay, don't promise, don't promise your spouse that you're never going to look again,
Mm.
because most likely, 90, at least in the cases I've seen, 95% of the time you are at some point. It's going to happen again, and now you've betrayed the promise.
Mm.
You know, you've broken this promise. You've been dishonest. So we can at least start with honesty, consent. Don't exploit each other. You know, be honest. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop this entirely forever, 100%. But I'll commit to honesty and whatever that means for us. And if that means I tell you every time, and we find that that works well as a couple, as a therapist, I would say, okay, you know, try that out. If they say, we've got to tell each other every time we have an attraction, I'm like, well, let's try that out a little bit and see how it goes. But I've typically seen that not go very well. I might actually maybe put a little of my own value in there,
Right.
like sometimes. Well, I don't know if that'll work, but let's see. But generally, I like people to sort of decide as a couple what their standards for honesty are, and how much candidness, and how often they talk and things like that.
It's so key because I think when I've worked with couples, I think often there's a partner that is concerned that their partner is viewing images in secret. But sometimes what is more damaging is that it was secret, that there wasn't honesty around it. And that can really impact the relationship above and beyond the content that you're viewing.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think about that, because on one hand, part of me is going, look, you've got to be honest. You can't lie to your spouse. And on the other hand, I'm also going, and it makes sense because we're encouraged to lie, right? In this, not in the like you're supposed to lie, but we're encouraged to, we're facilitated to lie in the sense of like, we don't know how to have these conversations.
Yep.
We've never talked about sex. You know, if you can't even admit to yourself that you are interested in sexuality or anything erotic. So the treatment plan that people sort of develop for themselves is, I'm going to keep doing this thing, and I'm going to lie about it, and I'm going to sacrifice this principle of honesty. That's often what people do when they have this dilemma of, I like this thing and I believe it's wrong, and so does my wife or my. I rarely see a husband concerned about it, even though women do view imagery.
Yeah, I've never worked with that husband. Yeah.
I've had one.
Wow.
That's kind of a tangent, but
Wow.
anyway, where we're going with that. So I mean, honesty. What is their agreement? Making sure they keep to that, and also some patients, as they grow as a couple, realizing that they came from a background perhaps of honest, open sexual health conversations were not something that has ever happened.
Yep.
Honesty is a process. I've never seen honesty, well, maybe once with clients. I've never seen honesty, or almost rarely, be an event where someone discloses everything and they're honest, and then that's it. They're perfectly honest the rest of their lives. It's a process of growth and disclosure, and here's something, and not like they're always revealing new things that they've done, but
Yeah.
it's a process. It's a growth kind of developmental thing, I think,
Yeah,
as couples to be that way.
yeah, and I appreciate that perspective about how we're socialized to kind of bury it and kind of be secretive and lie about it. And my hope with that is that we will develop more compassion for ourselves and our partners and how challenging this is. And even though a partner might be really hurt because their partner
Yeah,
doesn't
of
talk
course.
about this,
Yeah,
sometimes I've seen that, yeah, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't really want to hurt you. And like that's probably coming from a good place. And yet, really, honesty is the ideal, what we're shooting for. And it's going to take some time to get there. So being compassionate, understanding, and supporting each other to get to that ideal.
yeah, for sure. What I often see, and you've probably seen this, is someone says, "I'll never do it again," and then they just go back underground again.
Yep.
And then the spouse thinking, "Oh, well, I'm glad that's over."
There we go.
Yeah. No, it doesn't quite work that way.
Mm.
The next one is the next principle is sharing your values, either mutual values or just being open what your values are. So in any kind of sexual situation, what are your standards? What are your underlying motives for the sexual interaction with your partner? What is the meaning of this behavior? I see this a lot with dating um, couples and individual clients. They feel sometimes exploited because what the behavior meant, even down to like kissing,
Hmm.
what this meant to me turns out meant something very different to the other person.
Wow.
So I'm a strong believer that if you can't talk about it, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Huh.
So,
What a good principle to live by.
right? But a lot of people do a lot of things they can never talk about.
Wow.
So clarifying what your motivations are, and they're not always the same. Sometimes in a marriage, for example, somebody might want sex because they just want some pleasure. Another person might want some emotional connection.
Yeah.
They're open about that. Okay, if that works for this couple in that instance, if that's how it is every single time, maybe that could become a problem for that couple. I don't know, but at least they're open about it, about what they're looking for, and versus like, this is what this meant to me. Oh my gosh, this meant nothing to you.
Hmm.
Like, very different kind of thing. Um, Couples go in from like religious cultures in terms of like sexual imagery, sometimes with assumptions that this is what pornography, for example, they might use that word. Pornography is everything from like a rated R movie and up.
Yeah.
Another person would say, "Oh, that's not pornography." So the meaning of these things is quite different.
Yeah.
Not that they have to agree, but they need to be talking about it.
It's the
So what?
conversation, and it comes back to it. And like I'm constantly learning and surprised about the things I don't know. And I came across a conversation online in this Facebook group that talks about sexuality, and somebody mentioned like shopping for lingerie, and the partner was like, no, that's pornography. Like that's a model wearing lingerie. And I'm like, oh, that had never crossed my mind. And then there was a big kind of conversation amongst all the members talking about like, yeah, that's clearly pornography. That's clearly not. And it's like, whatever you believe about it doesn't matter as much. Of we need to have a conversation and be able to see where people are coming from. And like that one surprised me. Like I had never thought about that. Here's an opportunity for me to learn about how you approach this, and our values might be different on this.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Um, the last one is mutual pleasure. So this is sort of a value around the pleasure of sex and sexual behavior as a positive and life enhancing thing. Oftentimes there's this emphasis, especially for religious people, but I think for a lot of people in general, that like, um, don't do these things, or here's like the risks in terms of sexuality. Need to be really careful in these certain areas. There's not a lot of emphasis or space to talk about pleasure and how sexuality is a really positive thing. And even in some religious cultures, like it's a very positive thing in certain circumstances, right? Um, so this is an important part of um, working with someone who's right struggling with sexual imagery. What is the role of pleasure here? What is it they like about it? What is it about themselves their own sort of erotic or emotional kinds of interests or sensualities for themselves or their partner. How's this playing out? Um, some people, for example, do imagery. They feel like it's related to something that they're interested in, and they don't know how to tell their partner, "Hey, like I'm kind of interested in this thing," but they don't know how to say that, and so they go look it up online,
Hmm.
and they still don't know how to say it. And they still don't know how to bring it up. So then they start finding this pleasure online without having this conversation. So they've made kind of a unilateral decision,
Hmm.
even though they have this spoken or unspoken agreement that neither are going to be viewing imagery online. One person has sort of unilaterally sort of gone astray from that and made this decision that they're going to explore this pleasurable thing separately or without talking about it, right? Because pleasure is such a it's a compelling force in life, and I think even for a lot of religious people, it is an important sort of God-given part of our existence. I tell religious women all the time if they're struggling with sexuality and desire that and you've probably heard this, but that God gave you the only part, like men don't have the same part, that is it's only for pleasure.
It's
A
only
clitoris,
function.
yeah, the only function of a clitoris is pleasure. Men do not have that part. And some women are like, oh, you're right. Huh. I haven't thought of it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah. So clearly, pleasure is a big piece of this.
Yeah. So I'm trying to monitor my own reactions as I hear you talk about this principle. My reactions are like, no, you can't say that sex is pleasurable. Like that's just part of it. And I was thinking about like the things that I find pleasurable. I like working, building things out of wood. And I thought like, wow, if I approached like my circular saw out of a place of fear and lack of understanding
Yeah.
and lack of education, and it's
Yeah.
like I just gotta cut this board as fast as I can and get it done.
Oh
It's
no,
like,
that's a metaphor.
yeah, like that's gonna guarantee an injury. I'm probably gonna lose a limb. And I think about that's how we approach sexuality. We're afraid, we can't talk about it, and we gotta go as fast as we can to get it done. And I think about if we, and maybe that's the biggest thing I hear or think about as you talk about these 6 principles, is it requires us to slow down and reflect, be aware, have conversations, be informed. And when we do that, like building things is very pleasurable, and your body and sexual activity can be very pleasurable, but it requires those ingredients. And I think about we approach sex very much like it's so scary and bad. It's like you're probably going to get injured somehow then with that kind of mindset.
Right. Yeah. I love that metaphor. It almost makes it seem ridiculous.
It does, yeah.
What are we doing?
Ah,
This is a disaster.
absolute disaster. And yet you just reviewed 6 principles where it's like that's a game changer. If we were raised this way and had these chats and were empowered to be honest and negotiate, have conversations, acknowledge that, yeah, sex is pleasurable, and to talk about values and protect one another, we would probably be out of a job as far as pornography concerns, which is my dream. I do
Totally.
not want to work with pornography concerns forever. I
Me
want it to
neither.
be
I
done.
mean, yeah. I love doing these groups. I love working with these individual clients. And I've done groups for people that feel out of control, and I've worked with clients in groups who are the partners. And I really enjoy these conversations. But ideally, and there's a lot of pain there, which I'm thinking a lot of it isn't necessary.
Yeah.
If we could do a lot more prevention. I would love to be, working on depression
Yep.
and anxiety and other issues. And what do you want your sexuality to look like? What's your vision, as opposed to, where they start from, which is, really struggling, and a lot of distress that, hopefully, 20 years from now isn't a problem, but we'll see.
I hope so. That's my dream. Like, I started with Life After Pornography, this online program, because it's like, I know something about this. People are really struggling with the right direction education. They're going to be okay. But now I'm developing Life After Anxiety. And I'm so excited about that because anxiety is so universal, impacts so many of us. And it's like, yeah, pornography, a lot of it I feel like is preventable, just with the proper education, framework, and guidance.
Yeah, for sure.
So you keep using this term, out of control sexual behavior. And there's a lot of terms for pornography problems, from addiction to compulsion to impulsivity to hypersexual. And I often talk about it as like unwanted pornography viewing. But this term is kind of a specific kind of part of an approach. I wonder if you could share more about why you chose that term or that approach over some others.
Yeah. So as you, I mean, you mentioned a bunch of terms there. I mean, the first training I ever did, not conducted, but like attended, was a pornography addiction kind of approach for therapists to help clients with. And, you know, that was the addiction model was sort of how I saw things. Um, then I sort of moved to, you know, just reading a lot of the research and kind of both sides of that debate and whatnot. Sort of felt like, and seeing some clients that approach didn't work very well for. Okay, hypersexuality, that's the one.
Mm.
You know, and like that was going to be in the new DSM, the
Yeah.
diagnostic manual, and then it wasn't. And I was sort of confused, like, hey, that was supposed to be in there. Like, my client's struggling, and he doesn't
I
think he's
remember
a
that same day too. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought that was gonna make the cut. Oh.
yeah. What gives? I guess they don't have a problem. No, but like, so I went to that one, and then I'm like, well, is it like problematic pornography viewing? And then I was thinking about the word pornography, even like that can be used for clarity. It's also a legal definition of
Mm.
pornography, but then it can also be used, I think, harmfully. Like when we use the term, I even think about like child pornography, like it sort of normalizes it. And
Yeah.
like I was like, oh my gosh, when I first heard that kind of idea, like this is sexual abuse material.
Yes.
It's not, you know, this is beyond, this is a different category.
Different.
Um, and how a lot of my clients too would sort of, in terms of the honesty principle, they would say, well, I'm against pornography, so I'll just watch whatever on Instagram
Mm.
or something, and then they tell their wives, I'm not watching pornography or whatever, when they both sort of know actually when they think about it what pornography is for them. Whereas another couple might say, well, I feel like the imagery on Instagram is not pornography,
Mm.
and they're both sort of have that agreement, and okay, that's how they're working that out. Um, but I've seen people sort of just deceive their partners and themselves with these kinds of labels, both with the term pornography. That's why I like the term sexual imagery or sexual media, because what pornography is to you and to me or to anyone else, like it's different. But
Yep.
we can sort of generally agree what's sexual, usually.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, um, I was sort of like definitely like pro addiction camp. And then I was sort of like, well, I don't know, maybe this hypersexual model or sexual compulsivity. And then I was like, well, it doesn't really feel like OCD always. Some of my clients have OCD.
Yep.
Some of them have concerns about pornography, but not all of them, it feels like a compulsive thing.
Right.
Um, so is it, or then I thought, well, maybe some people are just really, really interested in sex. So it's not hypersexuality, but they just have a high sex drive. Again, that applies to some people. Um, And around this time, I was really sort of being dissatisfied with the addiction approach. And then, wouldn't you know it, I have this client who is like hardcore addiction guy, got a lot out of it. You know, followed up 2 years later, he had completely abstained still after 2 years.
Um,
You know, sobriety, sponsors, the whole thing, and had done really well. And so in my mind, I'm like, but that's not supposed to work for you,
it did.
but it did. And so I was kind of like in a place of like, well, that's not really my camp or the way I want to work. I think it's been less helpful than I'd like with most of my clients. Some it has helped, but with most I found it not to be successful. Um, and that's when I came around, or when I came across this out of control sexual behavior model.
Mm.
Uh, the creators of it just used those words. I think they got it from some research. Basically, the research was saying like, we don't know what to call this yet. That really fits everybody.
Yeah.
Um, so what it really means is not that the behavior. Here's another problem with labels. It's not that the behavior is out of control. It's that it feels out of control.
Yeah.
So to some degree, I don't feel in control of my behavior, whether I'm an addict or I'm hypersexual or I'm compulsive, whatever it is, or it's problematic or it's unwanted. I have some degree of not being in control and some subjective sense of it. Words are really important, I feel like, for clients and for therapy. Um, so I like to emphasize that, you know, it's just this subjective feeling of being out of control. If someone comes into me and says I'm an addict, I'll ask them, hey, what do you mean about that? Tell me what you mean by addiction. Let's look at that. But I'm not going to say, no, you're not. Or I'm not going to say, oh, great, let's treat your addiction.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do either. Someone comes in to me and says, I have bipolar or schizophrenia. I'm not going to go, okay, I'll say, well, tell me about that. What are your symptoms? Rather than just running with it. If someone says, I get a lot out of my addiction approach, congratulations. Like, I don't really have a stake in wanting to convert people to one way or the other. It's just what is going to work for you, what's workable for you. And if this works well for you, great. If it's not working, it's important to sort of walk through it, because these labels like addiction, as you know well, can sort of get in the way sometimes of progress. They can diagnose the person with sort of this disease when it's, in my view, not a disease. At the same time, a disease can be very compassionate in a very conservative community.
Yeah.
Have somebody who has this secret behavior and now it's come out, there could be a lot of shame there. But wait, he has a disease. We have a way to be compassionate toward this person now. So when I understand the pull of that. On the other hand, let's see, which hand am I doing? I forget. On the other hand, the other hand, it can prevent the person who's viewing the imagery from facing an existential crisis. That's really important. Hey, I think this is wrong, and I really like it, and my spouse thinks it's wrong, or whatever. What do I do with this? That's a huge dilemma, and a label just some labels can kind of just like push that away.
Yep.
Well, it's not a problem because you just have a disease.
Yep.
Sometimes I've had clients who get labeled with addiction, for example, and get put in a sex addiction group, and the person sitting next to them is a child abuser.
Mm.
And this kid, I say kid meaning let's say they're 18, masturbates sometimes.
Mm.
And they're both sex addicts. This is tragic.
Yeah.
And there's a different kind of treatment for non-consensual behaviors. Yeah. Self-fulfilling prophecies. Well, I'm an addict, so it just happened again. I've seen that. The funniest one, I say funny, it's not really funny, but I have a sort of a flippant sense of humor, so here we go anyway. I think the labels can be sort of self-deceptive. For example, let's say in a heterosexual marriage, wife feels like husband's an addict. Let's say she's even like pretty like open and progressive and like, okay, I think, pornography is not all bad. I don't mind if he watches pornography sometimes. I don't see this a lot with my couples, but let's say that's the case. But then she starts feeling like it's too much. And so she sends him she's like, maybe he's an addict. I thought I was like the cool wife, but maybe he's an addict. And so I'm going to send him to an addiction specialist. So there's certified sex addiction therapists who specialize in this treatment. And so he goes and gets this evaluation. And the evaluation says, you're not an addict. You have a problem, but this is not an addiction level behavior. And so he goes home to his wife and says, I don't have a problem. I'm not an addict. There's still a problem here. They still have a lot of conflict as a couple, what this behavior means, how they're negotiating it, or how they're talking about it. So not just the addiction label, although I find issues with that, but just the labels in general, I really want to be cautious about. And so I like the out of control sexual behavior approach because it sort of questions some of these labels in their use. But this approach, just to say a little bit about it, there's individual therapy and group involved. It's all about, as I said in the beginning of the discussion today, what is your vision for sexual health? And they create a sexual health plan where they talk about they have like sort of list of things that really help them, a list of things that they're kind of feeling ambivalent about, like maybe masturbation. I don't know if I'm ready to give this up, but I also don't know if it's right for me. So I'm just going to sort of monitor it for a while and put it in the sort of ambivalence category. And then they have these boundaries that they create. I'm committing to, what I just read in a book recently was, I'm not going to going to strip clubs was this guy's boundary, is this example in the book, during the course of the group. And if the client in the group crosses one of these boundaries, he discloses it to the group. This is one of the agreements. So next time he's driving home, he drives by the strip club and he thinks, if I go in, I've got to tell it to the group. Maybe I won't. But if he does, the group says, hey, what did you like most about it? Let's talk about it.
Wow.
What happened? What led up to it? And he's feeling all this shame, and now he's getting curiosity and passion back. Talk about how you made this decision. Those kinds of things. So it can be a really powerful model and very sort of autonomy granting, encouraging people to think through what their vision is and not just doing what they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Those might be the same in their culture, but they need to own it.
I think that's wonderful. So I just appreciated listening to you talk, because a lot of that is similar how I've approached and seen things. And I think I use a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy. And
I do
so
too.
I focus a lot on language and these labels. And for me, we talked about the challenges with addiction label, but it's just labels in general. And I think there's shortcuts. And those labels can be problematic because they kind of dilute the complexity of these issues, and we can get stuck with them and kind of hide behind them. So I really appreciate acceptance and commitment therapy for looking at language, slowing people down, getting out of their ruts. And I found that so helpful for not only pornography issues, but anxiety and compulsions. But with pornography, it's more than just that. We still need this sexual health talk and framework and boundaries, and talking about that in a way that doesn't contribute to more shame and judgment. So the fact of okay, I've set this boundary, and if I violate it, I get to talk about it, and I'm not going to be berated for it. I'm going to have to try to understand it and do some more work in that area.
Yes.
I really appreciate that approach to this.
And that's why I feel like for people in relationships, some kind of group where they can have these conversations is so important, because if your partner is feeling really hurt by your behavior, you cannot expect them to say, oh, tell me what you like most about it.
It's not going to happen.
No, they're devastated, or they're hurt, or they're upset, or they're annoyed at, or something. I've seen some couples that can have conversations around, what do you watch? What are you interested in? They can eventually get there to have these types of conversations, but not when someone is feeling really hurt and betrayed.
Yep. So it takes some work internally to get to that place, to be able to, when you talk with this or talk about this concern with someone in your life, that you can hear them and they can be upset or angry or scared or confused, and our walls don't go up. That we can respond to them just in the same way we would want to be responded to, with curiosity, with compassion, with gentleness and care.
Right, exactly.
So I appreciate you walking through those 6 values, thinking about more helpful ways to talk about this concern. And I think one thing that stands out is, anything related to sexuality or pornography, we probably need to slow down, take a little bit more time to understand ourselves and other people. And we may need support in that process, because not many of us grew up with that preparation or that skill set or insight. But I think what I've seen with pornography concerns, even though people have been struggling for years and years, that they can overcome that relatively quickly with the right guidance. But that guidance still requires a level of vulnerability and honesty and having tough conversations. And it's so doable. This does not have to be a life sentence or an unworkable problem, but it does require work.
Yeah. No, it sure does.
So any other things you would want people to know who might be struggling with pornography, or a partner whose partner struggles with pornography? What kind of hope would you want to give them?
Yeah. One, it's totally a normal problem, normal meaning typical. This is a really common issue. Not saying people don't struggle with it, but there's a good chance that a number of people that also are having similar struggles.
Yeah.
2/3 of marital problems are unsolvable, in the sense that it's never completely resolved, it's never going to be completely fixed. That's a normal thing, to have an unsolvable problem in marriage. A majority of problems are. And I think for some people, it's not that like they can't overcome an issue with pornography, but issues around like sexual health and being able to have these like really good conversations with partners that are challenging is a lifelong kind of thing,
Yeah.
and things aren't just fixed in that way. So sort of normalizing it in that sense. Um, have these conversations with people when you're dating, but not on the first date.
Yeah.
No, if someone asks you, "Hey, do you look at porn?" on your first date, you should run. This is not good boundaries. You know, I feel like sexual health conversations should really be happening. This is my bias. Should really be happening in a dating relationship. Once you're past that stage where you both realize you like each other. Maybe you've had that sort of like DTR where you're like, okay, we're dating now. Then you start having sexual health conversations,
Yeah.
and talking about erotic interests or conflicts or history or whatever it is you decide to include. But first date, you don't need to talk about this.
No.
It's fine.
No, talk about dessert.
Yeah, it doesn't need to even be a long date. But yeah, you can have these conversations for certain before you get married and before you're engaged even, but not on the first date. Um, as far as like individuals that are struggling, I think a big one is fellowship.
Mm.
I have, trying to think, once maybe seen a client really progress or overcome a concern around sexual imagery or pornography with just an individual therapist.
Wow.
And I think it's because individual therapy, while it can do a lot of that deeper internal work, and you can also learn a lot of skills in some cases, like with ACT, um, I have not seen a lot of, maybe this is just me, but I've seen a lot more success when someone also has some fellowship.
Yep.
And yeah, as much as I, talked about sort of the problems I see with labels and some types of groups, I feel like don't get enough fellowship because they're not allowed to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of have some concerns about groups like that, but whatever the group is, whatever the label is, if you can go and you can have less shame and you can be sort of challenged in some cases and you get used to sharing this side of yourself, this secret side that you've never shared with anyone before, like something, I can't remember the percentage, but a majority of people have something related to sex that's secret or shameful that happened to them or something they've done that they've never shared with anybody or maybe one other person. This
Yeah.
is a majority of humans. So it's a normal experience to have something that's shameful. Now imagine being in a group of caring individuals who are concerned about you for at least 6 months or maybe longer, where you meet with them every week and you talk about all this stuff.
Yep.
How much better that's going to be.
Yep.
And most people don't, well, a big majority don't want to do group. You don't
No,
want
you're right.
to,
No.
oh, don't want to do that. Totally get it. It's their shame kind of colluding with the sexual interest. Well, if I went to group, then I'd have to talk about this thing that I love. But if you're really motivated, if you're really ready to change, I feel like some type of group
Yep.
is going to be really key.
I'm with you 100%. I enjoy individual therapy, but my passion is group. There is just something there that you cannot replicate. And I think with pornography, we focus so much on it as it's a sexual concern, and that's part of it. But I think a lot of people turn to pornography because they're feeling disconnected
Yeah,
from themselves, from other people, and shame disconnects. But really, shame is coming from a place of wanting to be loved and accepted. And we just
totally.
pull back from that. And
Yep.
for me, connection is the antidote to a problem with pornography. It's probably the last thing we want to do. It's like, keep it secret. No one should know. But I've seen that you get people in a group and they talk and it's like, wow, they're like me. And I struggled with things and so did they. I'm okay with them and they're okay with me. Maybe we'll be all right. And that's the majority of the issue. When we can improve connection, reduce shame, I see people change their behavior rapidly. And those are the essential ingredients.
I think that's 80%.
Yep.
I mean, if you can that's 100% for a lot of people. I would agree
Yeah,
with you.
that's all they need. Yep.
Some people, I think, where the individual therapy can be helpful, aside from like individual mental health concerns, I feel like is when someone has like an erotic conflict where they've gone through, they have no more, all that shame's been reduced, and a lot of these other underlying issues have been sort of resolved. Then they have to face this issue of, but I really like this thing, actually.
Yeah.
I find pleasure in it, and it's important to me. And I still think it's wrong, or my partner thinks it's wrong, or my religion. Um, Sometimes individual therapy can be helpful for that. So I've seen people work that out in group as well.
Yeah.
But there are sometimes those erotic conflicts that people have, or existential dilemmas. What do I do with this fact?
Yep.
Well, one of my favorite things to say to people is, you don't have any options that are free from loss. There are no non-distress options. I didn't come up with that statement, but I love it because it's like, look, whatever we choose in life, isn't perfect.
Yep.
We're not going to get everything we want. So which loss are you willing to live with?
Yep. And that's reality.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts and experiences and background. I know I learned a lot. It was really helpful to think through some of those things, and you spent a lot of time thinking through it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.